October 28, 2025, 12:48 a.m. Eastern Pacific. The first signal came quietly. No sirens, no raised voices. Just a sudden rise on the infrared display of a P-8A Poseidon circling at 31,000 feet over a stretch of black water, 170 nautical miles west of Panama. On the screen, a long and steady heat signature appeared beneath the darkness. It was too uniform to be a freighter, too large to be a fishing vessel. The system marked it automatically. 346 feet long, metal hull, multiple heat sources inside, 6 separate industrial units glowing through layers of steel. Lieutenant Sarah Coleman reported it without taking her eyes off the console. Seconds later, the data moved through encrypted link, 16 channels, and landed at Task Force Trident in San Diego. For months, those screens had shown nothing but missed chances. Tonight, they showed something different. The analysts did not need long to understand what they were seeing. The thermal pattern was too exact. Industrial heat sources spaced evenly throughout the hull. Timed pulses matching large-scale chemical processing cycles. Probability 96.9%. Target identified: Santa Muerte. For 15 months, the vessel had moved like a rumor across the Pacific, disappearing between satellite windows, slipping through storms and blending into civilian traffic. Whenever an intercept team got close, the crew used innocent people on board as leverage and vanished beyond reach. But this time, the ship had nowhere left to hide. The Poseidon had her locked on radar, and Pacific Command's silence said more than any order could. At 12:53 a.m., San Diego sent the coordinates to the Pentagon. At 2 a.m. Eastern, a secure call reached the White House. The briefing was brief and cold. A 320-ton industrial vessel operating as a floating production facility for illegal cargo. On board, dozens of tons of restricted substances with an estimated street value of $12 billion. The damage behind those numbers could not be measured. Below deck, nearly 300 people from 17 countries were being held and forced to work 16-hour shifts under brutal control. Some had been missing for more than a year. The man behind it, Gonzalo El Azabache Morales, had transformed maritime smuggling into something far darker and more organized than anyone expected. His network had been connected to disappearances, black market medical crimes, and filmed acts of terror. It was an operation so disturbing that even rival criminal groups avoided direct contact. The US Navy called him the ghost manufacturer. The DEA called him a statistical anomaly. But inside the operations room in San Diego, he was no longer a legend. He was a target with coordinates. At 2:12 a.m., after a 10-minute consultation, Operation Iron Tide was approved. The order was clear: locate, contain, and stop Santa Muerte without harm to civilians. The mission profile was drafted in under 8 minutes. One of the fastest interagency approvals since Desert Storm. One officer later said the room went from caffeine-fueled noise to complete silence in record time. From the Poseidon's tail camera, the ocean below looked empty, a perfect black void. Only one faint glow broke the darkness, a thin line of heat beneath the surface, like a candle burning behind frosted glass. Radar confirmed it. A massive, low-profile vessel running dark. No AIS, no transponder, no running lights. Invisible to civilian systems, but fully exposed to military sensors. The Poseidon crew switched to passive tracking. The engines were eased back. Every movement now mattered. Inside the command center, analysts began building the timeline. Santa Muerte had started life as the hull of a decommissioned Panamax cargo ship. It had been stripped, reinforced, and rebuilt into what one engineer later described as a chemical city at sea. The 6 heat signatures suggested independent production zones operating at the same time, venting waste heat through hidden exhaust ducts near the waterline. The design was efficient enough to mislead satellites by spreading thermal output into ocean currents. Brilliant engineering, if you ignored the suffering hidden inside it. For months, the hunt had felt impossible. The Poseidon crews had even given it a nickname, Chasing Smoke. But tonight, the smoke glowed like a beacon. The chance of another false positive was now below 1%. The task force commander gave only 4 words. Lock it.
Don't blink. At 12:58 a.m., radar range showed 142 nautical miles, bearing 211, target speed 9 knots. The P-8A Poseidon's optical pod shifted into high gain mode, pushing through the darkness until the camera caught a faint glimmer from navigation lights below. Then, those lights vanished. The crew on the vessel had realized they were being watched, but by then, it was already too late. The Americans had the angle, the speed, the distance, and the pattern. By 1:04 a.m., every monitoring station across the Pacific data chain from Coronado to Key West was focused on one moving dot marked SM-01. Inside the Poseidon, the crew ran one final sweep. Thermal image, magnetic anomaly reading, radar outline. Every layer matched. After 15 months of slipping away, Santa Muerte had reappeared. The largest floating contraband facility ever recorded. Somewhere inside its steel corridors, 300 captive workers waited, unaware that the Navy had finally found them.
In San Diego, the operations board flashed a single line of green text. Target confirmed. Mission status active. No celebration, no speeches. Just one comment from the tactical officer, spoken quietly into his headset. About time the ghost showed up. And with that, the Pacific Fleet began to move. Quietly, methodically, like gravity pulling a tilted world back into place. By the time Operation Irontide received its final approval, the Pacific was still asleep. But every ship, drone, and submarine within 1,000 nautical miles had begun adjusting course. From satellites overhead to sonar buoys below the surface, an invisible perimeter started closing around Santa Muerte. The order was simple: surround, isolate, and move in. At 2:16 a.m., encrypted command packets left San Diego's relay tower, bouncing through 4 satellites and 1 Navy relay aircraft before reaching the first unit already in position. The Virginia-class submarine SSN 789 Delaware. The captain did not need the full briefing. One coded line was enough. Begin Phase 1. 300 feet beneath the Pacific, Delaware's sonar array came alive. Controlled broadband pulses spread through the water, narrowing Santa Muerte's position to within 90 meters. The target was moving north-northwest at 8.7 knots, completely unaware that its own radar picture was already being buried under electromagnetic noise. Then came the Hammerhead X units. 24 compact underwater systems slipped from 3 separate Navy platforms and descended into the dark like silent metal sharks. Their purpose was not to damage the vessel. Their purpose was to cut it off from the world. Each unit released a rotating pattern of magnetic interference and radar distortion, forming what Navy operators call a digital cage. At 2:23 a.m., that cage closed around Santa Muerte's bridge. The armed crew noticed first. The radar froze mid-sweep. GPS lost its lock. Radio channels dissolved into static. For a few seconds, confusion spread across the bridge. One crewman tapped the console. Another hit the transponder casing with his palm. Nothing changed. It was as if the ocean itself had gone offline. The vessel's navigation lights flickered once, then went dark. In seconds, the most advanced black market ship in the Pacific had been cut off from sight, sound, and signal. High above, the Poseidon kept watching from 31,000 feet. The water around Santa Muerte remained black and motionless, but the sky above it was no longer empty. At 2:26 a.m., the second wave arrived. 42 stealth UAVs, codenamed Spectre Hawks, slipped through the thin cloud cover like shadows. Each was barely larger than a surfboard, with a radar signature smaller than a seabird, yet each carried a highly precise tactical payload. Their flight paths were fully autonomous. Every drone already had a target assigned before it reached the vessel. From the Poseidon's infrared feed, the operation looked almost unreal.
Tiny flashes of orange appeared across the deck, one after another, each placed with absolute precision. No chaos, no wide shockwaves, no uncontrolled blasts. Just a clean pattern of calculated strikes. In 49 seconds, 38 armed guards were taken out of action. They dropped against the cold steel of a ship whose alarm systems no longer responded. Inside the U.S. command network, one operator broke the silence.
Outer perimeter cleared. 0 civilian signatures affected. By 2:28 a.m., the waters around Santa Muerte had become a locked military zone. 12 Virginia-class submarines surfaced in a wide ring, ocean water sliding from their dark hulls in almost perfect symmetry. From them came teams of Navy SEALs and Delta operators, 480 men moving with quiet discipline, their faces hidden behind night vision masks, their weapons configured for low signature entry. The sea swallowed every sound as they began their climb. At 2:30 a.m., the boarding started. Steel hooks caught the hull, lines pulled tight. One after another, dark figures rose up the wet sides of the ship that had haunted 2 continents for over a year. They moved fast, 12 seconds per operator from the waterline to the deck. Above them, 3 drones circled low, releasing faint strobe patterns meant to confuse any remaining lookouts. On board Santa Muerte, panic finally broke through. A shout echoed across the deck. A bright flash followed from somewhere near the upper rail. The flash gave away the position instantly. 5 seconds later, the threat was gone. At 2:31 a.m., the internal breach began. Team Alpha entered through a maintenance hatch on the starboard side. Team Bravo moved in through the aft service corridor. Thermal overlays guided them around bulkheads, fuel lines, and unstable compartments. Each team had 90 seconds to reach its assigned section. Time was everything. Below deck, the ship was a maze of chemical tanks, sealed rooms, and improvised holding areas. Infrared sensors showed hundreds of human heat signatures packed into narrow spaces. Civilians were there, restrained and waiting, with no idea that rescue was now only a few meters away. Team Charlie marked the section and held position. The civilians would be freed soon, but first, the reactors had to be secured. High above, the Poseidon continued feeding live telemetry to the operations room in San Diego. Technicians mapped every operator's movement onto a 3-dimensional model of Santa Muerte. Green markers pushed through red zones like a slow, steady heartbeat. By 2:35 a.m., more than half the vessel was under U.S. control. The remaining guards, cut off and disoriented, reacted blindly. Their signals were jammed, their cameras were down, their command structure had collapsed. Every time a hostile movement appeared on thermal imaging, the response was immediate and controlled. Then silence returned. At 2:38 a.m., the infrared picture confirmed the outcome. External decks secure, interior zones isolated, civilians unharmed. Santa Muerte, once a ghost ship powered by fear and secrecy, now floated powerless in the dark, surrounded by the quiet machinery of American precision. A new line appeared on the command display in San Diego. Phase 2 complete. Beneath it, the tactical officer typed a short reminder in green text. Now comes the hard part. By 3:05 a.m., the vessel had fallen silent. Santa Muerte, the ship that had outmaneuvered multiple navies, now drifted blind and motionless, surrounded by American steel. Floodlights from 3 destroyers washed its hull in hard white light. The Pacific, usually restless and endless, seemed to pause around it. Inside, 6 SEAL teams continued clearing the remaining decks. Team Alpha reached the bridge first. Each one was stopped before they could even reach the controls. Team Bravo moved into the armory, stepping through a maze of thin metal trip lines stretched across the compartment like silver spider webs. Using fiber optic cameras, they mapped the entire system and safely disabled 4 emergency devices meant to destroy the ship if it was ever cornered. For an empire worth $12 billion, the backup plan was surprisingly primitive. The SEALs had another name for it: cheap insurance. Below deck, Team Charlie reached the real reason Operation Irontide existed.
The cargo hold had been turned into a prison block. 300 civilians were packed inside. Weak, silent. Some could barely stand. The air was heavy with ammonia, diesel, chemical residue, and the stale weight of months without sunlight. When the locks were cut open, no one cheered. At first, no one even moved. Then one man looked up and whispered one word: "Americans." And slowly, the entire hold began to come alive. From the first breach to full control, it took 9 minutes and 32 seconds.
Every lab, every corridor, every heat source on the thermal map turned green. Operation Irontide had succeeded, without the loss of a single civilian life. On Santa Muerte's deck, a US flag shimmered under the portable floodlights. It was not part of any official ceremony, but everyone in the fleet understood what it meant. The nightmare was over. By 3:20 a.m., medics from the USS Arlington and Coast Guard cutter Stratton rushed aboard. In minutes, the deck became a floating field hospital. Triage tents unfolded, IV lines hung from railings. Bottles of clean water were passed from hand to hand. For many of the rescued, that first sip brought more tears than words. Some were American fishermen who had vanished months earlier. One was a retired firefighter from Houston. Another was a young engineer from Texas. None of them had expected to see daylight again. Below deck, Navy specialists began documenting the evidence. The scale was staggering. Dozens of tons of illegal cargo. 6 industrial production units still hot when the teams entered. More than 300 military-grade firearms, many traced to illegal routes through Europe and North Africa. 8 encrypted hard drives containing bank records and shipping manifests tied to 3 continents. Every barrel, crate and ledger told the same story. Profit built on human suffering, now sealed under US custody. At 4:13 a.m., a blacked-out MH-60 Seahawk touched down on the deck.
Its rotors pushed mist through the floodlights as Team Echo escorted one hooded prisoner forward. Gonzalo El Azabache Morales. His bare feet scraped against the steel. He said nothing, and somehow his silence felt louder than a confession. For 4 years, he had built a floating fortress out of fear, money, and secrecy. It fell in less than 10 minutes. The Seahawk lifted off toward an undisclosed facility. Morales did not look back. Neither did the men who captured him. By 4:40 a.m., cleanup operations were underway. Chemical teams secured the reactors. Divers checked the hull for structural damage. Radio silence was lifted, and the first encrypted transmission went out. Objective secured. No civilian loss. 2 operators injured, both stable. In San Diego, the message appeared across the wall of screens. The room stayed quiet. No applause, no speeches. Only the sound of keyboards and the steady hum of air conditioning. The commanding officer finally spoke. Mission logged. Review at 0600. When dawn broke over the Pacific, sunlight spilled across twisted steel and scorched plating. The ship that had once moved through the ocean like a nightmare now drifted like an empty shell. On the bridge rail, a small US flag moved in the morning wind. Standard Navy issue, 3 by 5 feet. But in that moment, it looked like victory itself. At 5:02 a.m., the final transmission came from the strike group commander aboard the Arlington. Operation Irontide complete. All civilians safe. The ocean is ours again. In a world where chaos usually owns the headlines, this mission barely made one. But for the sailors, aviators, analysts, operators, and medics who had spent 15 months chasing a ghost,
The silence afterward was the reward. A $12 billion empire erased in under 10 minutes. 300 lives pulled back from the dark. 2 injured, none lost. And one message carved into naval history forever. Precision is not about glory. It is about survival. The sea rolled on, indifferent as ever, but for once, it carried justice with it.